Section 36 of the Story of Gösta Berling. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Lars, Rolander. The Story of Gösta Berling by Selma LAGERLÖF, translated from the Swedish by Pauline Bancroft Flach. Part 2, Chapter 21. Broby Fair. On the first Friday in October the big Broby Fair begins, and lasts 1 week. It is the festival of the autumn. There is slaughtering and baking in every house. The new winter clothes are then worn for the first time. The brandy rations are doubled. Work rests. There is feasting on all the estates. The servants and labourers draw their pay and hold long conferences over what they shall buy at the fair. People from a distance come in small companies with knapsacks on their backs and staffs in their hands. Many are driving their cattle before them to the market. Small, obstinate young bulls and goats stand still and plant their forefeet, causing much vexation to their owners and much amusement to the bystanders. The guest rooms at the manors are filled with guests, bits of news are exchanged, and the prices of cattle discussed. And on the first fair day, what crowds swarm up Broby Hill and over the wide market place. Booths are set up where the tradespeople spread out their wares. Rope dancers, organ grinders, and blind violin players are everywhere, as well as fortune tellers, sellers of sweetmeats and of brandy. Beyond the rows of booths, vegetables and fruit are offered for sale by the gardeners from the big estates. Wide stretches are taken up by ruddy copper kettles. It is plain, however, by the movement in the fair that there is want in Svartsjö and Bro and Lövik and the other provinces about the Löven. Trade is poor at the booths. There is most bustle in the cattle market, for many have to sell both cow and horse to be able to live through the winter. It is a gay scene. If one only has money for a glass or two, one can keep up one's courage. And it is not only the brandy which is the cause of the merriment. When the people from the lonely wood huts come down to the market place with its seething masses and hear the din of the screaming, laughing crowd, they become as if delirious with excitement. Everybody who does not have to stay at home to look after the house and cattle has come to this Broby Fair. There are the pensioners from Ekeby and the peasants from Nygård, horse dealers from Norway, Finns from the northern forests, vagrants from the highways. Sometimes the roaring sea gathers in a whirlpool, which turns about a middle point. No one knows what is at the centre, until a couple of policemen break a way through the crowd to put an end to a fight or to lift up an overturned cart. Towards noon the great fight began. The peasants had got it into their heads that the tradespeople were using too short yardsticks, and it began with quarrelling and disturbance about the booths. Then it turned to violence. Every one knows that for many of those who for days had not seen anything but want and suffering, it was a pleasure to strike. It made no difference whom or what. And as soon as they see that a fight is going on, they come rushing from all sides. The pensioners mean to break through to make peace after their fashion, and the tradesmen run to help one another. Big Måns from Fors is the most eager in the game. He is drunk and he is angry. He has thrown down a tradesman and has begun to beat him. But at his calls for help, his comrades hurry to him and try to make Måns let him go. Then Måns sweeps the rolls of cloth from one of the counters and seizes the top, which is a yard broad and 5 yards long, and made of thick planks, and begin to brandish it as a weapon. He is a terrible man, Big Måns. It was he who kicked out a wall in the Filipstad jail, he who could lift a boat out of the water and carry it on his shoulders. When he begins to strike about him with a heavy counter, every one flies before him. But he follows, striking right and left. For him it is no longer a question of friends or enemies. He only wants some one to hit, since he has got a weapon. The people scatter in terror. Men and women scream and run. But how can the women escape when many of them have their children by the hand? Boots and carts stand in their way. Oxen and cows, maddened by the noise, prevent their escape. In a corner between the booths a group of women are wedged, and towards them the giant rages. Does he not see a tradesman in the midst of the crowd? He raises the plank and lets it fall. In pale, shuddering terror the women receive the attack, sinking under the deadly blow. But as the board falls whistling down over them, its force is broken against a man's upstretched arms. One man has not sunk down, but raised himself above the crowd. One man has voluntarily taken the blow to save the many. The women and children are uninjured. One man has broken the force of the blow, but he lies now unconscious on the ground. Big Mons does not lift up his board. He has met the man's eye, just as the counter struck his head, and it has paralyzed him. He lets himself be bound and taken away without resistance. But the report flies about the fair that Big Mons has killed Captain Lennart. They say that he who had been the people's friend died to save the women and defenceless children. And a silence falls on the great square, where life had lately roared at fever pitch. Trade ceases, the fighting stops, the people leave their dinners. Their friend is dead. The silent throng stream towards the place where he is fallen. He lies stretched out on the ground quite unconscious. No wound is visible, but his skull seems to be flattened. Some of the men lift him carefully up onto the counter, which the giant has let fall. They think they perceive that he still lives. "Where shall we carry him?" they ask one another. "Home," answers a harsh voice in the crowd. Yes, good men, carry him home. Lift him up on your shoulders and carry him home. He has been God's plaything. He has been driven like a feather before his breath. Carry him home. That wounded head has rested on the hard barrack bed in the prison, on sheaves of straw in the barn. Let it now come home and rest on a soft pillow. He has suffered undeserved shame and torment. He has been hunted from his own door. He has been a wandering fugitive, following the paths of God, where he could find them. But his promised land was that home, whose gates God had closed to him. Perhaps his house stands open for one who has died to save women and children. Now he does not come as a malefactor, escorted by reeling boon companions. He is followed by a sorrowing people, in whose cottages he has lived while he helped their sufferings. Carry him home. And so they do. 6 men lift the board on which he lies on their shoulders and carry him away from the fair grounds. Wherever they pass, the people move to one side and stand quiet. The men uncover their heads, the women courtesy as they do in church when God's name is spoken. Many weep and dry their eyes. Others begin to tell what a man he had been. So kind, so gay, so full of counsel, and so religious. It is wonderful to see, too, how as soon as one of his bearers gives out, another quietly comes and puts his shoulder under the board. So Captain Lennart comes by the place where the pensioners are standing. "I must go and see that he comes home safely," says Beerencreutz, and leaves his place at the roadside to follow the procession to Helgesater. Many follow his example. The fair grounds are deserted. Everybody has to follow to see that Captain Lennart comes home. When the procession reaches Helgesater, the house is silent and deserted. Again the colonel's fist beats on the closed door. All the servants are at the fair. The captain's wife is alone at home. It is she again who opens the door. And she asks, as she asked once before, "What do you want?" Whereupon the colonel answers, as he answered once before, "We are here with your husband." She looks at him where he stands stiff and calm as usual. She looks at the bearers behind him who are weeping, and at all the mass of people. She stands there on the steps and looks into hundreds of weeping eyes who stare sadly up at her. Last she looks at her husband who lies stretched out on the bier, and she presses her hand to her heart. "That is his right face," she murmurs. Without asking more, she bends down, draws back a bolt, opens the hall doors wide, and then goes before the others into the bedroom. The colonel helps her to drag out the big bed and shake up the pillows. And so Captain Lennart is once more laid on soft down and white linen. "Is he alive?" she asks. "Yes," answers the colonel. "Is there any hope?" "No, nothing can be done." There was silence for a while. Then a sudden thought comes over her. "Are they weeping for his sake, all those people?" "Yes." "What has he done?" "The last thing he did was to let big Mons kill him to save women and children from death." Again she sits silent for a while and thinks. "What kind of face did he have, Colonel, when he came home 2 months ago?" The colonel started. Now he understands. Now at last he understands. Gosta had painted him. "So it was on account of one of your pranks that I shut him out from his home? How will you answer for that, Colonel?" Beerencreutz shrugged his broad shoulders. "I have much to answer for." "But I think that this must be the worst thing you have done." "Nor have I ever gone a heavier way than that to day up to Helgesater. Moreover, there are 2 others who are guilty in this matter." "Who?" "Sintram is one. You yourself are the other. You are a hard woman. I know that many have tried to speak to you of your husband." "It is true," she answers. Then she begs him to tell her all about that evening at Broby. He tells her all he can remember, and she listens silently. Captain Lennart lies still unconscious on the bed. The room is full of weeping people. No one thinks of shutting out that mourning crowd. All the doors stand open. The stairs and the halls are filled with silent, grieving people. Far out in the yard they stand in close masses. When the colonel has finished, she raises her voice and says, "If there are any pensioners here, I ask them to go. It is hard for me to see them when I am sitting by my husband's deathbed." Without another word the colonel rises and goes out. So do Gosta Berling and several of the other pensioners who had followed Captain Lennart. The people move aside for the little group of humiliated men. When they are gone, the captain's wife says, "Will some of them who have seen my husband during this time tell me where he has lived and what he has done?" Then they begin to give testimony of Captain Lennart to his wife, who has misjudged him and sternly hardened her heart against him. It lasted a long time before they all were done. All through the twilight and the evening they stand and speak. One after another steps forward and tells of him to his wife, who would not hear his name mentioned. Some tell how he found them on a sick bed and cured them. There are wild brawlers whom he has tamed. There are mourners whom he has cheered, drunkards whom he had led to sobriety. Every one who had been in unbearable distress had sent a message to God's wayfarer, and he had helped them. or at least he had waked hope and faith. Out in the yard the crowd stands and waits. They know what is going on inside. That which is said aloud by the deathbed is whispered from man to man outside. He who has something to say pushes gently forward. Here is one who can bear witness, they say, and let him pass. And they step forward out of the darkness, give their testimony, and disappear again into the darkness. What does she say now? Those standing outside ask, when some one comes out, what does she say? She shines like a queen. She smiles like a bride. She has moved his armchair up to the bed and laid on it the clothes which she herself had woven for him. But then a silence falls on the people. No one says it. All know it at the same time. He is dying. Captain Lennart opens his eyes and sees everything. He sees his home, the people, his wife, his children, the clothes, and he smiles. But he has only waked to die. He draws a rattling breath and gives up the ghost. Then the stories cease, but a voice takes up a death hymn. All join in, and borne on hundreds of strong voices, the song rises on high. It is earth's farewell greeting to the departing soul. End of section 36 of the story of Gösta Berling, read by Lars, Rolander. Section 37 of the story of Gösta Berling. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Lars, Rolander. The Story of Gösta Berling by Selma LAGERLÖF, translated from the Swedish by Pauline Bancroft Flach. Part 2, Chapter 22. The Forest Cottage. It was many years before the pensioners' reign at Ekeby. The shepherd's boy and girl played together in the wood, built houses with flat stones, and picked cloudberries. They were both born in the wood. The wood was their home and mansion. They lived in peace with everything there. The children looked upon the lynx and the fox as their watchdogs. The weasels was their cat, hares and squirrels their cattle, owls and grouse sat in their bird cage. The pines were their servants, and the young birch trees guests at their feasts. They knew the hole where the viper lay curled up in his winter rest, and when they had bathed they had seen the water snake come swimming through the clear water. But they feared neither snake nor wild creature. They belonged to the wood, and it was their home. There nothing could frighten them. Deep in the wood lay the cottage where the boy lived. A hilly wood path led to it. Mountains closed it in and shut out the sun. A bottomless swamp lay near by and gave out the whole year round an icy mist. Such a dwelling seemed far from attractive to the people on the plain. The shepherd's boy and girl were some day to be married, live there in the forest cottage, and support themselves by the work of their hands. But before they were married, war passed over the land, and the boy enlisted. He came home again without wound or injured limb, but he had been changed for life by the campaign. He had seen too much of the world's wickedness and man's cruel activity against man. He could no longer see the good. At first no one saw any change in him. With the love of his childhood he went to the clergyman and had the banns published. The forest cottage above Ekeby was their home, as they had planned long before. But it was not a happy home. The wife looked at her husband as at a stranger. Since he had come from the wars, she could not recognize him. His laugh was hard, and he spoke but little. She was afraid of him. He did no harm and worked hard. Still he was not liked. for he thought evil of everybody. He felt himself like a hated stranger. Now the forest animals were his enemies. The mountain which shut out the sun and the swamp which sent up the mist were his foes. The forest is a terrible place for one who has evil thoughts. He who will live in the wilderness should have bright memories. Otherwise he sees only murder and oppression among plants and animals, just as he had seen it before among men. He expects evil from everything he meets. The soldier, Jan Hok, could not explain what was the matter with him, but he felt that nothing went well with him. There was little peace in his home. His sons who grew up there were strong, but wild. They were hardy and brave men, but they too lived at enmity with all men. His wife was tempted by her sorrow to seek out the secrets of the wilderness. In swamp and thicket she gathered healing herbs. She could cure sickness and give advice to those who were crossed in love. She won fame as a witch and was shunned, although she did much good. One day the wife tried to speak to her husband of his trouble. Ever since you went to the war, she said, you have been so changed. What did they do to you there? Then he rose up and was ready to strike her. And so it was every time she spoke of the war, he became mad with rage. From no one could he bear to hear the word war, and it soon became known. So people were careful of that subject. But none of his brothers in arms could say that he had done more harm than others. He had fought like a good soldier. It was only all the dreadful things he had seen which had frightened him, so that since then he saw nothing but evil. All his trouble came from the war. He thought that all nature hated him, because he had had a share in such things. They who knew more could console themselves that they had fought for fatherland and honor. What did he know of such things? He only felt that everything hated him because he had shed blood and done much injury. When the major's wife was driven from Ekeby, he lived alone in his cottage. His wife was dead and his sons away. During the fairs his house was always full of guests. Black-haired, swarthy gypsies put up there. They liked those best whom others avoid. Small, long-haired horses climbed up the wood path, dragging carts loaded with children and bundles of rags. Women prematurely old, with features swollen by smoking and drinking, and men with pale, sharp faces and sinewy bodies followed the carts. When the gypsies came to the forest cottage, there was a merry life there. Brandy and cards and loud talking followed with them. They had much to tell of thefts and horse stealing and bloody fights. The Broby fair began on a Friday, and then Captain Lennart was killed. Big Mons, who gave the death blow, was son to the old man in the forest cottage. When the gypsies on Sunday afternoon sat together there, they handed old Jan Hok the brandy bottle oftener than usual, and talked to him of prison life and prison fare and trials, for they had often tried such things. The old man sat on the chopping block in the corner and said little. His big lackluster eyes stared at the crowd which filled the room. It was dusk, but the wood fire lighted the room. The door was softly opened, and two women entered. It was the young Countess Elizabeth, followed by the daughter of the Broby clergyman. Lovely and glowing, she came into the circle of light. She told them that Gösta Berling had not been seen at Ekeby since Captain Lennart died. She and her servant had searched for him in the wood the whole afternoon. Now she saw that there were men here who had much wondered and knew all the past. Had they seen him? She had come in to rest and to ask if they had seen him. It was a useless question. None of them had seen him. They gave her a chair. She sank down on it and sat silent for a while. There was no sound in the room. All looked at her and wondered at her. At last she grew frightened at the silence, started, and tried to speak of indifferent things. She turned to the old man in the corner. I think I've heard that you have been a soldier, she said. Tell me something of the war. The silence grew still deeper. The old man sat as if he had not heard. It would be very interesting to hear about the war from some one who had been there himself, continued the countess. But she stopped short, for the Broby clergyman's daughter shook her head at her. She must have said something forbidden. Everybody was looking at her as if she had offended against the simplest rule of propriety. Suddenly a gypsy woman raised her sharp voice and asked, "Are you not she who has been countess at Borg?" "Yes, I am." "That was another thing than running about the wood after a mad priest." The countess rose and said farewell. She was quite rested. The woman who had spoken followed her out through the door. "You understand, countess," she said. "I had to say something, for it does not do to speak to the old man of war. He can't bear to hear the word. I meant well." Countess Elizabeth hurried away, but she soon stopped. She saw the threatening wood, the dark mountain, and the reeking swamp. It must be terrible to live here for one whose soul is filled with evil memories. She felt compassion for the old man who had sat there with the dark gypsies for company. "Anna-Lisa," she said, "let us turn back. They were kind to us, but I behaved badly. I want to talk to the old man about pleasanter things." And happy to have found some one to comfort, she went back to the cottage. "I think," she said, "that Gosta Berling is wandering here in the wood and means to take his own life. It is therefore important that he be soon found and prevented. I and my maid Anna-Lisa thought we saw him sometimes, but then he disappeared. He keeps to that part of the mountain where the broom girl was killed. I happen to think that I do not need to go way down to Ekeby to get help. Here sit many active men who easily could catch him." "Go along, boys," cried the gypsy woman. "When the countess does not hold herself too good to ask service of the forest people, you must go at once." The men rose immediately and went out to search. Old Jan Hok sat still and stared before him with lustrous eyes. Terrifyingly gloomy and hard he sat there. The young woman could think of nothing to say to him. Then she saw that a child lay sick on a sheaf of straw, and noticed that a woman had hurt her hand. Instantly she began to care for the sick. She was soon friends with the gossiping women and had them show her the smallest children. In an hour the men came back. They carried Gosta Berling bound into the room. They laid him down on the floor before the fire. His clothes were torn and dirty, his cheeks sunken, and his eyes wild. Terrible had been his ways during those days. He had lain on the damp ground. He had burrowed with his hands and face in bogs, dragged himself over rocks, forced his way through the thickest underbrush. Of his own will he had never come with the men, but they had overpowered and bound him. When his wife saw him so, she was angry. She did not free his bound limbs. She let him lie where he was on the floor. With scorn she turned from him. "How you look!" she said. "I had never meant to come again before your eyes," he answered. "Am I not your wife? Is it not my right to expect you to come to me with your troubles? In bitter sorrow I have waited for you these 2 days." "I was the cause of Captain Lennart's misfortunes. How could I dare to show myself to you?" "You are not often afraid, Gosta." "The only service I can do you, Elizabeth, is to rid you of myself." Unspeakable contempt flashed from under her frowning brows at him. "You wish to make me a suicide's wife?" His face was distorted. "Elizabeth, let us go out into the silent forest and talk." "Why should not these people hear us?" she cried, speaking in a shrill voice.
Are we better than any of them? Has any one of them caused more sorrow and injury than we? They are the children of the forest and of the highway. They are hated by every man. Let them hear how sin and sorrow also follows the Lord of Ekeby, the beloved of all, Gösta Berling. Do you think your wife considers herself better than any of them? Or do you?"
He raised himself with difficulty onto his elbow and looked at her with sudden defiance.
"I am not such a wretch as you think."
Then she heard the story of those 2 days. The first day Gosta wandered about in the wood, driven by remorse. He could not bear to meet any one's eye, but he did not think of dying. He meant to journey to far distant lands. On Sunday, however, he came down from the hills and went to the Bro church. Once more he wished to see the people, the poor, hungry people whom he had dreamt of serving when he had sat by the Broby clergyman's pile of shame, and whom he had learned to love when he saw them disappear into the night with the dead broom girl. The service had begun when he came to the church. He crept up to the gallery and looked down on the people. He had felt bitter agony. He had wanted to speak to them, to comfort them in their poverty and hopelessness. If he had only been allowed to speak in God's house, hopeless as he was, he would have found words of hope and salvation for them all. Then he left the church, went into the sacristy, and wrote the message which his wife already knew. He had promised that work should be renewed at Ekeby, and grain distributed to those in greatest need. He had hoped that his wife and the pensioners would fulfill his promises when he was gone. As he came out, he saw a coffin standing before the parish hall. It was plain, put together in haste, but covered with black crape and wreaths. He knew that it was Captain Lennart's. The people had begged the captain's wife to hasten the funeral, so that all those who had come to the fair could be at the burial. He was standing and looking at the coffin when a heavy hand was laid on his shoulder. Sintram had come up to him. "Gosta," he said, "if you want to play a regular trick on a person, lie down and die. There is nothing more clever than to die. Nothing which so deceives an honest man who suspects no harm. Lie you down and die, I tell you." Gosta listened with horror to what he said. Sintram complained of the failure of well-laid plans. He had wanted to see a waste about the shores of the Löven. He had made the pensioners lords of the place. He had let the Broby clergyman impoverish the people. He had called forth the drought and the famine. At the Broby fair the decisive blow was to have fallen. Excited by their misfortunes, the people should have turned to murder and robbery. Then there should have been lawsuits to beggar them. Famine, riot, and every kind of misfortune should have ravaged them. Finally, the country would have become so odious and detestable that no one could have lived there, and it would all have been Sintram's doing. It would have been his joy and pride, for he was evil-minded. He loved desert wastes and uncultivated fields. But this man who had known how to die at the right moment had spoiled it all for him. Then Gosta asked him what would have been the good of it all. "It would have pleased me, Gosta, for I am bad. I am the grizzly bear on the mountain. I am the snowstorm on the plain. I like to kill and to persecute. Away, I say, with people and their works. I don't like them. I can let them slip from between my claws and cut their capers. That is amusing too for a while. But now I am tired of play. Gosta, now I want to strike. Now I want to kill and to destroy." He was mad, quite mad. He began a long time ago as a joke with those devilish tricks. And now his maliciousness had taken the upper hand. Now he thought he really was a spirit from the lower regions.
He had fed and fostered the evil in him until it had taken possession of his soul. For wickedness can drive people mad as well as love and brooding. He was furious, and in his anger he began to tear the wreaths from off the coffin. But then Gosta Berling cried, "Let the coffin be!" "Well, well, well, so I shall not touch it. Yes, I shall throw my friend Lennart out on the ground and trample on his wreaths. Do you not see what he has done to me? Do you not see in what a fine grey coach I am riding?" And Gosta then saw that a couple of prison vans with the sheriff and constables of the district stood and waited outside the churchyard wall. "I ought to send Captain Lennart's wife thanks that she yesterday set herself down to read through old papers in order to find proof against me in that matter of the powder, you know. Shall I not let her know that she would have done better to occupy herself with brewing and baking than in sending the sheriff and his men after me? Shall I have nothing for the tears I have wept to induce Charling to let me come here and read a prayer by my good friend's coffin?"
And he began again to drag on the crape. Then Gosta Berling came close up to him and seized his arms. "I will give anything to make you let the coffin alone," he said. "Do what you like," said the madman. "Call if you like. I can always do something before the sheriff gets here. Fight with me if you like. That will be a pleasing sight here by the church. Let us fight among the wreaths and palls."
"I will buy rest for the dead at any price. Take my life, take everything."
"You promise much."
"You can prove it."
"Well, then kill yourself."
"I will do it. But first the coffin shall be safely under earth." And so it was. Sintram took Gosta's oath that he would not be alive 12 hours after Captain Lennart was buried.
"Then I know that you can never be good for anything," he said.
It was easy for Gosta Berling to promise. He was glad to be able to give his wife her liberty. Remorse had made him long for death. The only thing which troubled him was that he had promised the major's wife not to die as long as the Broby clergyman's daughter was a servant at Ekeby. But Sintram said that she could no longer be considered a servant, since she had inherited her father's fortune. Gosta objected that the Broby clergyman had hidden his treasures so well that no one had been able to find them. Then Sintram laughed and said that they were hidden up among the pigeons' nests in the church tower. Thereupon he went away. And Gosta went back to the wood again. It seemed best to him to die at the place where the broom girl had been killed. He had wandered there the whole afternoon. He had seen his wife in the wood, and then he had not had the strength to kill himself. All this he told his wife while he lay bound on the floor of the cottage. "Oh," she said sadly, when he had finished, "how familiar it all is! Always ready to thrust your hands into the fire, Gosta. Always ready to throw yourself away. How noble such things seemed to me once! How I now value calmness and good sense! What good did you do the dead by such a promise? What did it matter if Sintram had overturned the coffin and torn off the crape? It would have been picked up again. There would have been found new crape, new wreaths. If you had laid your hand on that good man's coffin, there before Sintram's eyes, and sworn to live to help those poor people whom he wished to ruin, that I should have commended. If you had thought, when you saw the people in the church, I will help them. I will make use of all my strength to help them, and not lay that burden on your weak wife, and on old men with failing strength, I should also have commended that." Gosta Berling lay silent for a while. "We pensioners are not free men," he said at last. "We have promised one another to live for pleasure and only for pleasure. Woe to us all if one breaks his word." "Woe to you," said the countess indignantly, "if you shall be the most cowardly of the pensioners, and slower to improve than any of them. Yesterday afternoon the whole 11 sat in the pensioners' wing. and they were very sad. You were gone. Captain Lennart was gone. Glory and honor of Ekeby were gone. They left the toddy tray untouched. They would not let me see them. Then the maid Anna Lisa, who stands here, went up to them. You know she is an energetic little woman who for years has struggled despairingly against neglect and waste. Today I have been again at home and looked for father's money, she said to the pensioners, but I have not found anything. All the debts are paid, and the drawers and closets are empty.
We are sorry for you, Anna Lisa, said Beerencreutz.
When the major's wife left Ekeby, continued Anna Lisa, she told me to see after her house, and if I had found father's money, I would have built up Ekeby. But as I did not find anything else to take away with me, I took father's shame heap, for great shame awaits me when my mistress comes again and asks me what I have done with Ekeby.
Don't take so much to heart what is not your fault, Anna Lisa, said Beerencreutz again.
But I did not take the shame heap for myself alone, said Anna Lisa. I took it also for your reckoning, good gentlemen. Father is not the only one who has been the cause of shame and injury in this world. And she went from one to the other of them and laid down some of the dry sticks before each. Some of them swore, but most of them let her go on. At last Beerencreutz said calmly,
It is well. We thank you. You may go now.
When she had gone, he struck the table with his clenched hand till the glasses rang.
From this hour, he said, absolutely sober, brandy shall never again cause me such shame.
Thereupon he rose and went out. They followed him by degrees, all the others. Do you know where they went, Gosta? Well, down to the river, to the point where the mill and the forge had stood. And there they began to work. They began to drag away the logs and stones and clear the place. The old men have had a hard time. Many of them have had sorrow. Now they can no longer bear the disgrace of having ruined Ekeby. I know too well that you pensioners are ashamed to work, but now the others have taken that shame on them. Moreover, Gosta, they mean to send Anna Lisa up to the major's wife to bring her home. But you, what are you doing? He found still an answer to give her.
What do you want of me, of a dismissed priest, cast off by men, hateful to God?
I too have been in the Bro church to-day, Gosta. I have a message to you from two women. Tell Gosta, said Marianne Sinclair, that a woman does not like to be ashamed of him she has loved. Tell Gosta, said Anna Stjärnhök, that all is now well with me. I manage my own estates. I do not think of love, only of work. At Berga too they have conquered the first bitterness of their sorrow. But we all grieve for Gosta. We believe in him and pray for him. But when will he be a man? Do you hear? Are you cast off by men? Continued the countess. Your misfortune is that you have been met with too much love. Women and men have loved you. If you only jested and laughed, if you only sang and played, they have forgiven you everything. Whatever it has pleased you to do has seemed right to them. And you dare to call yourself an outcast. Or are you hateful to God? Why did you not stay and see Captain Lennart's burial? As he had died on a fair day, his fame had gone far and wide. After the service, thousands of people came up to the church. The funeral procession was formed by the town hall. They were only waiting for the old dean. He was ill and had not preached, but he had promised to come to Captain Lennart's funeral. And at last he came with head sunk on his breast and dreaming his dreams, as he is wont to do now in his old age, and placed himself at the head of the procession. He noticed nothing unusual. He walked on the familiar path and did not look up. He read the prayers and threw the earth on the coffin, and still noticed nothing. But then the sexton began a hymn. Hundreds and hundreds of voices joined in. Men, women, and children sang. Then the dean awoke from his dreams. He passed his hand over his eyes and stepped up on the mound of earth to look. Never had he seen such a crowd of mourners. All were singing, all had tears in their eyes, all were mourning. Then the old dean began to tremble. What should he say to these people? He must say a word to comfort them. When the song ceased, he stretched out his arms over the people. I see that you are mourning, he said, and sorrow is heavier to bear for one who has long to live than for me who will soon be gone. He stopped dismayed. His voice was too weak and words failed him. But he soon began again. His voice had regained its youthful strength and his eyes glowed. First he told all he knew of God's wayfarer. Then he reminded us that no outward polish nor great ability had made that man so honored as he now was, but only that he had always followed God's ways. And now he asked us to do the same. Each should love the other and help him. Each should think well of the other. And he explained everything which had happened this year. He said it was a preparation for the time of love and happiness which now was to be expected. And we all felt as if we had heard a prophet speak. All wished to love one another. All wished to be good. He lifted his eyes and hands and proclaimed peace in the neighborhood. Then he called on a helper for the people. Some one will come, he said. It is not God's will that you shall perish. God will find some one who will feed the hungry and lead you in his ways. Then we all thought of you, Gösta. We knew that the dean spoke of you. The people who had heard your message went home talking of you. And you wandered here in the wood and wanted to die. The people are waiting for you, Gösta. In all the cottages they are sitting and saying that, as the mad priest at Ekeby is going to help them, all will be well. You are their hero, Gösta. Yes, Gösta, it is certain that the old man meant you, and that ought to make you want to live. But I, Gösta, who am your wife, I say to you that you shall go and do your duty. You shall not dream of being sent by God. Any one can be that. You shall work without any heroics. You shall not shine and astonish. You shall so manage that your name is not too often heard on the people's lips. But think well before you take back your promise to Sintram. You have now got a certain right to die, and life ought not to offer you many attractions. There was a time when my wish was to go home to Italy, Gösta. It seemed too much happiness for me, a sinner, to be your wife and be with you through life. But now I shall stay. If you dare to live, I shall stop. But do not await any joy from that. I shall force you to follow the weary path of duty. You need never expect words of joy or hope from me. Can a heart which has suffered like mine love again? Tearless and joyless I shall walk beside you. Think well, Gösta, before you choose to live. We shall go the way of penance. She did not wait for his answer. She nodded to Anna-Lisa and went. When she came out into the wood, she began to weep bitterly, and wept until she reached Ekeby. Arrived there, she remembered that she had forgotten to talk of gladder things than war to Jan Höök, the soldier. In the cottage there was silence when she was gone. Glory and honor be to the Lord God, said the old soldier suddenly. They looked at him. He had risen and was looking eagerly about him. Wicked, wicked has everything been, he said. Everything I have seen since I got my eyes opened has been wicked. Bad men, bad women, hate and anger in forest and plain.
But she is good. A good woman has stood in my house. When I am sitting here alone, I shall remember her. She shall be with me in the wood." He bent down over Gosta, untied his fetters, and lifted him up. Then he solemnly took his hand. "Hateful to God," he said, and nodded. "That is just it. But now you are not any more. Nor I either, since she has been in my house. She is good."
The next day old Jan Hok came to the bailiff Scharling.
"I will carry my cross," he said. "I have been a bad man, therefore I have had bad sons."
And he asked to be allowed to go to prison instead of his son. But that could not be. The best of old stories is the one which tells of how he followed his son, walking beside the prison van, how he slept outside his cell, how he did not forsake him until he had suffered his punishment. End of section 37 of the story of Gösta Berling, read by Lars, Rolander. Section 38 of the story of Gösta Berling. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Lars, Rolander. The Story of Gösta Berling by Selma LAGERLÖF. Translated from the Swedish by Pauline Bancroft Flach. Part 2, Chapter 23. Margareta Celsing. A few days before Christmas, the major's wife started on her journey down to the Lövsjö district. But it was not till Christmas Eve that she came to Ekeby. During the whole journey she was ill. Yet, in spite of cold and fever, people had never seen her in better spirits, nor heard her speak more friendly words. The Broby clergyman's daughter, who had been with her in the Elfdal forest ever since October, sat by her side in the sledge and wished to hasten the journey. But she could not prevent the old woman from stopping the horses and calling every wayfarer up to her to ask for news.
"How is it with you all here in Lövsjö?" she asked.
All is well, was the answer. Better times are coming. The mad priest there at Ekeby and his wife help us all. A good time has come, answered another. Sintram is gone. The Ekeby pensioners are working. The Broby clergyman's money is found in the Broby church tower. There is so much that the glory and power of Ekeby can be restored with it. There is enough too to get bread for the hungry. Our old dean has waked to new life and strength, said a third. Every Sunday he speaks to us of the coming of the kingdom of God. And the major's wife drove slowly on, asking every one she met, "How is it here? Do you not suffer from want here?" And the fever and the stabbing pain in her breast were assuaged when they answered her. There are two good and rich women here, Marianne Sinclair and Anna Stjärnhök. They help Gösta Berling to go from house to house and see that no one is starving. And no more brandy is made now. It was as if the major's wife had sat in the sledge and listened to a long divine service. She had come to a blessed land. She saw old furrowed faces brighten when they spoke of the time which had come. The sick forgot their pains to tell of the day of joy. We all want to be like the good Captain Lennart, they said. We all want to be good. We want to believe good of every one. We will not injure any one. It shall hasten the coming of God's kingdom. She found them all filled with the same spirit. On the larger estates, free dinners were given to those who were in greatest need. All who had work to be done had it done now. She had never felt in better health than when she sat there and let the cold air stream into her aching breast. She could not drive by a single house without stopping and asking. Everything is well, they all said. There was great distress, but the good gentlemen from Ekeby help us. You will be surprised at everything which has been done there. The mill is almost ready, and the smithy is at work, and the burnt down house ready for the roof. Ah, it would only last a short time, but still it was good to return to a land where they all helped one another and all wished to do good. The major's wife felt that she could now forgive the pensioners, and she thanked God for it.
Anna-Lisa, she said, I feel as if I had already come into the heaven of the blessed.
When she at last reached Ekeby and the pensioners hurried to help her out of the sledge, they could hardly recognize her, for she was as kind and gentle as their own young countess. The older ones, who had seen her as a young girl, whispered to one another, "It is not the major's wife at Ekeby. It is Margareta Celsing who has come back." Great was the pensioners' joy to see her come so kind and so free from all thoughts of revenge, but it was soon changed to grief when they found how ill she was. She had to be carried immediately into the guest room in the wing and put to bed. But on the threshold she turned and spoke to them.
It has been God's storm, she said. God's storm. I know now that it has all been for the best.
Then the door to the sick room closed, and they never saw her again. There is so much to say to one who is dying. The words throng to the lips when one knows that in the next room lies one whose ears will soon be closed for always. "Ah, my friend," one wants to say, "can you forgive? Can you believe that I have loved you in spite of everything? Ah, my friend, thanks for all the joy you have given me." That will one say, and so much more. But the major's wife lay in a burning fever, and the voices of the pensioners could not reach her. Would she never know how they had worked, how they had taken up her work? After a little while the pensioners went down to the smithy. There all work was stopped, but they threw new coal and new ore into the furnace and made ready to smelt. They did not call the smith, who had gone home to celebrate Christmas, but worked themselves at the forge. If the major's wife could only live until the hammer got going, it would tell her their story. Evening came, and then night, while they worked. Several of them thought how strange it was that they should again celebrate the night before Christmas in the smithy. Kevenhuller, who had been the architect of the mill and the smithy, and Christian Berg stood by the forge and attended to the melting iron. Gosta and Julius were the strokers. Some of the others sat on the anvil under the raised hammer, and others sat on coal carts and piles of pig iron. Lowenborg was talking to Eberhard the philosopher, who sat beside him on the anvil.
Sintram dies tonight, he said. Why just tonight? Asked Eberhard. You know that we made an agreement last year. Now we have done nothing which has been ungentlemanly, and therefore he has lost. You who believe in such things know very well that we have done a great deal which has been ungentlemanly. First, we did not help the major's wife. Second, we began to work. Third, it was not quite right that Gösta Berling did not kill himself when he had promised.
I have thought of that too, answered Lowenborg.
But my opinion is that you do not rightly comprehend the matter. To act with the thought of our own mean advantage was forbidden us, but not to act as love or honor or our own salvation demanded. I think that Sintram has lost. Perhaps you are right. I tell you that I know it. I have heard his sleigh bells the whole evening, but they are not real bells. We shall soon have him here.
And the little old man sat and stared through the smithy door, which stood open, out at the bit of blue sky studded with stars which showed through it. After a little while he started up. "Do you see him?" he whispered. "There he comes creeping. Do you not see him in the doorway?" "I see nothing," replied Eberhard. "You are sleepy, that is the whole story." "I saw him so distinctly against the sky. He had on his long wolfskin coat and fur cap. Now he is over there in the dark, and I cannot see him. Look, now he is up by the furnace. He is standing close to Christian Berg, but Christian seems not to see him. Now he is bending down and is throwing something into the fire. Oh, how wicked he looks! Take care, friends, take care!" As he spoke, a tongue of flame burst out of the furnace and covered the smiths and their assistants with cinders and sparks. No one, however, was injured. "He wants to be revenged," whispered Lowenborg. "You too are mad," cried Eberhard. "You ought to have had enough of such things." "Do you not see how he is standing there by the prop and grinning at us? But verily I believe that he has unfastened the hammer." He started up and dragged Eberhard with him. The second after, the hammer fell thundering down onto the anvil. It was only a clamp which had given way, but Eberhard and Lowenborg had narrowly escaped death. "You see that he has no power over us," said Lowenborg triumphantly. "But it is plain that he wants to be revenged, and he called Gosta Berling to him. Go up to the women, Gosta. Perhaps he will show himself to them too. They are not so used as I to seeing such things. They may be frightened. And take care of yourself, Gosta, for he has a special grudge against you, and perhaps he has power over you on account of that promise." Afterwards they heard that Lowenborg had been right, and that Sintram had died that night. Some said that he had hanged himself in his cell. Others believed that the servants of justice secretly had him killed, for the trial seemed to be going well for him, and it would never do to let him out again among the people in Lövsjö. Still others thought that a dark visitor had driven up in a black carriage, drawn by black horses, and had taken him out of prison. And Lowenborg was not the only one who saw him that night. He was also seen at Fors and in Ulrika Dillner's dreams. Many told how he had shown himself to them until Ulrika Dillner moved his body to the Bro churchyard. She also had the evil servants sent away from Fors and introduced there good order. After that it was no longer haunted. It is said that before Gosta Berling reached the house, a stranger had come to the wing and had left a letter for the major's wife. No one knew the messenger, but the letter was carried in and laid on the table beside the sick woman. Soon after she became unexpectedly better. The fever decreased, the pain abated, and she was able to read the letter. The old people believed that her improvement depended on the influence of the powers of darkness. Sintram and his friends would profit by the reading of that letter. It was a contract written in blood on black paper. The pensioners would have recognized it. It was composed on the last Christmas Eve in the smithy at Ekeby. And the major's wife lay there now and read that since she had been a witch and had sent pensioners' souls to hell, she was condemned to lose Ekeby. That and other similar absurdities she read. She examined the date and signatures, and found the following note beside Gosta's name: "Because the major's wife has taken advantage of my weakness to tempt me away from honest work and to keep me as pensioner at Ekeby. Because she has made me Ebba Dohna's murderer by betraying to her that I am a dismissed priest, I sign my name." The major's wife slowly folded the paper and put it in its envelope. Then she lay still and thought over what she had learned. She understood with bitter pain that such was the people's thought of her. She was a witch and a sorceress to all those whom she had served. to whom she had given work and bread. This was her reward. They could not believe anything better of an adulteress. Her thoughts flew. Wild anger and a longing for revenge flamed up in her fever-burning brain. She had Anna Lisa, who with Countess Elizabeth tended her, send a message to Högfors, the manager and overseer. She wished to make her will. Again she lay thinking. Her eyebrows were drawn together. Her features were terribly distorted by suffering. "You are very ill," said the countess softly.
Yes, more ill than ever before.
There was silence again. But then the major's wife spoke in a hard, harsh voice.
It is strange to think that you, too, countess, you whom every one loves, are an adulteress.
The young woman started.
Yes, if not in deed, yet in thoughts and desire, and that makes no difference. I who lie here feel that it makes no difference.
I know it.
And yet you are happy now. You may possess him you loved without sin. That black spectre does not stand between you when you meet. You may belong to one another before the world, love one another, go side by side through life.
Oh, madam, madam!
How can you dare to stay with him? Cried the old woman with increasing violence. Repent, repent in time. Go home to your father and mother before they come and curse you. Do you dare to consider Gösta Berling your husband? Leave him. I shall give him Ekeby. I shall give him power and glory. Do you dare to share that with him? Do you dare to accept happiness and honor? I did not dare to. Do you remember what happened to me? Do you remember the Christmas dinner at Ekeby? Do you remember the cell in the bailiff's house?
Oh, madam, we sinners go here side by side without happiness. I am here to see that no joy shall find a home by our hearth. Do you think I do not long for my home? Oh, bitterly do I long for the protection and support of home. But I shall never again enjoy them. Here I shall live in fear and trembling, knowing that everything I do leads to sin and sorrow, knowing that if I help one, I ruin another. Too weak and foolish for the life here, and yet forced to live it, bound by an everlasting penance.
With such thoughts we deceive our hearts, cried the major's wife. But it is weakness. You will not leave him, that is the only reason.
Before the countess could answer, Gösta Berling came into the room.
Come here, Gösta,
said the major's wife instantly, and her voice grew still sharper and harder.
Come here, you whom everybody praises. You shall now hear what has happened to your old friend, whom you allowed to wander about the country, despised and forsaken. I will first tell you what happened last spring when I came home to my mother, for you ought to know the end of that story. In March I reached the ironworks in the Elfdal forest, Gösta. Little better than a beggar I looked. They told me that my mother was in the dairy, so I went there and stood for a long while silent at the door. There were long shelves round about the room, and on them stood shining copper pans filled with milk. And my mother, who was over 90 years old, took down pan after pan and skimmed off the cream. She was active enough, the old woman, but I saw well enough how hard it was for her to straighten up her back to reach the pans. I did not know if she had seen me, but after a while she spoke to me in a curious, shrill voice. So everything has happened to you as I wished, she said. I wanted to speak and to ask her to forgive me, but it was a waste of trouble. She did not hear a word of it. She was stone deaf. But after a while she spoke again. You can come and help me, she said. Then I went in and skimmed the milk. I took the pans in order and put everything in its place, and skimmed just deep enough, and she was pleased. She had never been able to trust any of the maids to skim the milk. but I knew of old how she liked to have it.
Now you can take charge of this work,
She said, and then I knew that she had forgiven me. And afterwards, all at once, it seemed as if she could not work any more. She sat in her armchair and slept almost all day. She died 2 weeks before Christmas. I should have liked to have come before, Gosta, but I could not leave her."
She stopped. She began to find breathing difficult, but she made an effort and went on.
"It is true, Gosta, that I wish to keep you near me at Ekeby. There is something about you which makes every one rejoice to be with you. If you had shown a wish to be a settled man, I would have given you much power. I always hoped that you would find a good wife. First I thought that it would be Marianne Sinclair, for I saw that she loved you already when you lived as woodcutter in the wood. Then I thought that it would be Ebba Dohna, and one day I drove over to Borg and told her that if she would have you for husband, I would leave you Ekeby in my will. If I did wrong in that, you must forgive me."
Gosta was kneeling by the bed with his face hidden in the blankets and was moaning bitterly.
"Tell me, Gosta, how you mean to live. How shall you support your wife? Tell me that you know that I have always wished you well."
And Gosta answered her smiling, while his heart almost burst with pain. "In the old days, when I tried to be a laborer here at Ekeby, you gave me a cottage to live in, and it is still mine. This autumn I have put it quite in order. Lowenborg has helped me, and we have whitewashed the ceilings and hung the walls with paper and painted them. The inner little room Lowenborg calls the countess's boudoir, and he has gone through all the farmhouses round about for furniture, which has come there from manor house auctions. He has bought them, so that there we have now high-backed armchairs and chests of drawers with shining mountings. But in the outer big room stands the young wife's weaving loom and my lathe. Household utensils and all kinds of things are there. And there Lowenborg and I have already sat many evenings and talked of how the young countess and I will have it in the cottage. But my wife did not know it till now. We wanted to tell her when we should leave Ekeby."
"Go on, Gosta."
Lowenborg was always saying that a maid was needed in the house. In the summer it is lovely here in the birch grove, he used to say, but in winter it will be too lonely for the young wife. You will have to have a maid, Gosta. And I agreed with him, but I did not know how I could afford to keep one. Then he came one day and carried down his music and his table with a painted keyboard and put it in the cottage. 'It is you, Lowenborg, who are going to be the maid,' I said to him. He answered that he would be needed. Did I mean the young countess to cook the food and to carry wood and water? No, I had not meant her to do anything at all, as long as I had a pair of arms to work with. But he still thought that it would be best if there were two of us, so that she might sit the whole day on her sofa and embroider. I could never know how much waiting upon such a little woman needed, he said.
"Go on," said the major's wife. "It eases my pain. Do you think that your young countess would be willing to live in a cottage?"
He wondered at her scornful tone, but continued. "No, I did not dare to think it. But it would have been so perfect if she had been willing. It is 30 miles from any doctor. She who has a light hand and a tender heart would have had work enough to tend wounds and allay fevers. And I thought that everybody in trouble would find the way to the lady mistress in the forest cottage. There is so much distress among the poor, which kind words and gentle heart can help."
"But you yourself, Gosta Berling?"
"I shall have my work at the carpenter's bench and lathe. I shall hereafter live my own life. If my wife will not follow me, I cannot help it. If some one should offer me all the riches of the universe, it would not tempt me. I want to live my own life. Now I shall be and remain a poor man among the peasants, and help them with whatever I can. They need some one to play the polka for them at weddings and at Christmas.
They need some one to write letters to their distant sons, and that some one I will be. But I must be poor."
It will be a gloomy life for you, Gosta."
Oh no, it would not be if we were but two who kept together. The rich and happy would come to us as well as the poor. It would be gay enough in our cottage. Our guests would not care if the food was cooked right before their eyes, or be shocked that two must eat from the same plate."
"And what would be the good of it all, Gosta? What praise would you win?"
Great would be my reward if the poor would remember me for a year or two after my death. I should have done some good if I had planted a couple of apple trees at the house corners, if I had taught the country fiddlers some of the old tunes, and if the shepherd children could have learnt a few good songs to sing in the wood paths. You can believe me, I am the same mad Gosta Berling that I was before. A country fiddler is all I can be, but that is enough. I have many sins to atone for. To weep and to repent is not for me. I shall give the poor pleasure. That is my penance."
"Gosta,"
said the major's wife,
"it is too humble a life for a man with your powers. I will give you Ekeby."
"Oh," he cried in terror, "do not make me rich. Do not put such duties upon me. Do not part me from the poor."
"I will give Ekeby to you and the pensioners," repeated the major's wife. "You are a capable man, Gosta, whom the people bless. I say like my mother, you shall take charge of this work."
"No, we could not accept it. We who have misjudged you and caused you such pain."
"I will give you Ekeby, do you hear?"
She spoke bitterly and harshly, without kindness. He was filled with dismay. "Do not tempt the old men. It would only make them idlers and drunkards again. God in heaven, rich pensioners, what would become of us?"
"I will give you Ekeby, Gosta. But then you must promise to set your wife free. Such a delicate little woman is not for you. She has had to suffer too much here in the land of the bear. She is longing for her bright native country. You shall let her go. That is why I give you Ekeby."
But then Countess Elizabeth came forward to the major's wife and knelt by the bed. "I do not long any more. He who is my husband has solved the problem and found the life I can live. No longer shall I need to go stern and cold beside him and remind him of repentance and atonement. Poverty and want and hard work will do that. The paths which lead to the poor and sick I can follow without sin. I am no longer afraid of the life here in the north. But do not make him rich, then I do not dare to stay." The major's wife raised herself in the bed.
"You demand happiness for yourselves," she cried, and threatened them with clenched fists. "Happiness and blessing! No, let Ekeby be the pensioners, that they may be ruined. Let man and wife be parted, that they may be ruined. I am a witch, I am a sorceress. I shall incite you to evil doing. I shall be what my reputation is."
She seized the letter and flung it in Gosta's face. The black paper fluttered out and fell on the floor. Gosta knew it too well.
"You have sinned against me, Gosta. You have misjudged one who has been a second mother to you. Do you dare to refuse your punishment? You shall accept Ekeby, and it shall ruin you, for you are weak. You shall send home your wife, so that there will be no one to save you. You shall die with a name as hated as mine. Margareta Celsing's obituary is that of a witch. Yours shall be that of a spendthrift and an oppressor of the poor."
She sank back on the pillows, and all was still. Through the silence rang a muffled blow, now one and then another. The sledged hammer had begun its far echoing work. "Listen," said Gosta Berling.
So sounds Margareta Celsing's obituary. That is not a prank of drunken pensioners. That is the song of the victory of labor, raised in honor of a good old worker. Do you hear what the hammer says? Thanks, it says. Thanks for good work. Thanks for bread which you have given the poor. Thanks for roads which you have opened. Thanks for districts which you have cultivated. Thanks for pleasure with which you have filled your halls. Thanks, it says, and sleep in peace. Your work shall live and continue. Your house shall always be a home for happy labor. Thanks, it says, and do not judge us who have sinned. You who are now starting on the journey to the regions of peace, think gentle thoughts of us who still live. Gosta ceased, but the sledge hammer went on speaking. All the voices which had ever spoken kindly to the major's wife were mingled with the ring of the hammer. Gradually her features relaxed, as if the shadow of death had fallen over her. Anna-Lisa came in and announced that the gentleman from Högfors had come. The major's wife let them go. She would not make any will. "Oh, Gosta Berling, man of many deeds," she said, "so you have conquered once more. Bend down and let me bless you." The fever returned with redoubled strength. The death rattle began. The body toiled through dreary suffering. But the spirit soon knew nothing of it. It began to gaze into the heaven which is opened for the dying. So an hour passed, and the short death struggle was over. She lay there so peaceful and beautiful that those about her were deeply moved. "My dear old mistress," said Gosta, "so have I seen you once before. Now has Margareta Celsing come back to life. Now she will never again yield to the major's wife at Ekeby." When the pensioners came in from the forge, they were met by the news of Margareta Celsing's death. Did she hear the hammer? They asked. She had done so, and they could be satisfied. They heard too that she had meant to give Ekeby to them, but that the will had never been drawn. That they considered a great honor, and rejoiced over it as long as they lived. But no one ever heard them lament over the riches they had lost. It is also said that on that Christmas night Gosta Berling stood by his young wife's side and made his last speech to the pensioners. He was grieved at their fate when they now must all leave Ekeby. The ailments of old age awaited them. The old and worn out find a cold welcome. And so he spoke to them. Once more he called them old gods and knights who had risen up to bring pleasure into the land of iron. But he lamented that the pleasure garden, where the butterfly winged pleasure rules, is filled with destructive caterpillars, and that its fruits are withered. Well, he knew that pleasure was a good thing to the children of the earth, and it must exist. But like a heavy riddle, the question always lay upon the world, how a man could be both gay and good. The easiest thing and yet the hardest, he called it. Hitherto they had not been able to solve the problem. Now he wanted to believe that they had learned it, that they had all learned it during the year of joy and sorrow, of happiness and despair. You dear old people, in the old days you gave me precious gifts, but what have I given you? Perhaps it may gladden you that your names sound again in connection with the dear old places. May all the brightness which belonged to your life fall again over the tracts where you have lived. Borg still stands, Björne still stands, Ekeby still lies by Lake Löven, surrounded by falls and lake, by park and smiling meadows. And when one stands on the broad terraces, legends swarm about one like the bees of summer. But speaking of bees, let me tell one more old story. The little Ruster who went as a drummer at the head of the Swedish army
when in 1813 it marched into Germany, could never weary of telling stories of that wonderful land in the south. The people there were as tall as church towers, the swallows were as big as eagles, the bees as geese.
Well, but the beehives?
The beehives were like our ordinary beehives.
How did the bees get in it?
Well, that they had to look out for, said the little ruster. Dear reader, must I say the same? The giant bees of fancy have now swarmed about us for a year and a day. But how they are going to come into the beehive of fact, that they really must find out for themselves. The End. End of section 38 and end of the book The Story of Gösta Berling by Selma LAGERLÖF, translated from the Swedish by Pauline Bancroft Flach and read by Lars, Rolander. Thank you for listening.